You have 30 days to remove that illegal structure, or the association will have it removed at your expense. That was the voice on my answering machine the first Tuesday in April, and the structure she meant was the dock my wife and I had built with our own hands the summer before Diane got sick. The woman who left the message was Paula Render, president of the Cedar Hollow Shores Homeowners Association for 9 years running, and she had never once set foot on my property or read a single page of my deed. She believed the cove in front of my cabin belonged to her association because the new development wrapped around 2 sides of it. She was wrong about that in a way she could not yet imagine, because what she did not know was that 3 months earlier I had quietly purchased the submerged land under that water, the lakebed itself, recorded at the county and signed by a clerk whose office had held the original survey since before her subdivision existed. If a stranger called your home and threatened to tear down the last thing you built with someone you loved, and you already held the one piece of paper that made her threat illegal, what would you have done with the 30 days she gave you? My name is Walt Brennan. I am 62 years old, and for 31 years I worked as a licensed land surveyor across 3 counties in the mountains, running boundary lines for ranchers, the Forest Service, and anybody who needed to know exactly where their dirt stopped and the next man's began. I retired 4 years ago to the cabin on Troutfinger Cove, a narrow blue arm of Lake Verenda that my grandfather bought in 1951 when the only road in was a logging 2-track. 2. The cabin sits on 6 acres of pine and granite, and the dock runs 40 feet out over water, so clear you can count the stones on the bottom in July. My wife Diane and I built that dock the summer of her diagnosis, board by board, because she wanted to sit at the end of it in the mornings with her coffee and watch the light come up over the ridge. I remember the lumber coming up the mountain on Pete Lund's flatbed, cedar 2x6s still smelling of the mill, and Diane stepping each board off with her own feet to be sure the run was true before I drove a single screw. She was a school teacher for 30 years, and she measured the world that way, by what would hold and what would not. We worked through the heat of July, her handing me the galvanized screws one at a time from a coffee can, me on my knees on the warm planking, and when we set the last board, she sat down on the end of it with her shoes off and her feet in the lake and said it was the finest thing we had ever made together, better than the house. Doe, better than the marriage some days, and she laughed when she said it, so I would know which days she meant. She got 11 mornings out there before the treatments made the walk too hard. I counted them. A man who has spent his life counting things does not stop when the thing he is counting is the last of something. She passed the following winter, in February, with the cove frozen white. And still, and I carried her coffee mug out to the end of the dock that first spring alone and set it down on the rail where she used to set it. I kept the coffee ritual, I kept the dock, and I kept every piece of paper that touched that land the way a man keeps the tools that fed him, in labeled folders, in a fireproof cabinet, in order. The development came 3 years after Diane died. They called it Cedar Hollow Shores, 240 homes on the old Tasker Ranch, marketed to people from the city who wanted a lake view and a gate, and a sense that someone official was keeping the riffraff out. The developer was a company called Verenda Crest Partners, and the public face of the Homeowners Association was Paula Render, a woman of about 55 who drove a white luxury SUV with a vanity plate and wore a blazer the color of a road flare to walk a gravel shoreline in sandals. I want to be fair to her. She believed what she was doing was legitimate. That belief was the most dangerous thing about her, because it meant she never stopped to check whether it was true. The first contact had come the autumn before, friendly enough, a flyer in my gate box inviting me to join the association as a courtesy member. I declined in writing, politely. noting that my parcel predated the subdivision by 70 years and lay outside its plat. I keep a copy of that letter. I keep copies of everything. That habit was not vanity. A surveyor who cannot produce his field notes is a surveyor nobody hires twice, and after 3 decades, the filing was as automatic as breathing. So when Paula's voice came off the machine that April morning with its 30-day threat, I did not call her back angry. I did what I always did. I wrote down the date and the time, Tuesday, the 7th of April, 9:40 in the morning, and I saved the recording to 2 places, and I started a new folder with her name on the tab. I had a feeling I would need the room. The dock was not illegal. I knew that the way I knew the sun would clear the ridge at 6:15. Knowing a thing and being left in peace to enjoy it, though, are 2 different animals. And I had spent enough years watching boundary disputes turn neighbors into enemies to understand that Paula Render was not going to be argued out of a belief that flattered her. She had decided the cove was hers. The development brochures showed it as a community amenity, a shared waterfront, with little kayak icons drawn right over the water in front of my cabin. Somebody had sold those homes partly on the promise of that view and that water, and that somebody had never checked who owned the bottom of it. That was the part I had checked. 2 years back, when the grading equipment first showed up on the Tasker Ranch, I did what any surveyor would do. I pulled the plats. I drove to the county seat, an hour and 40 minutes down the mountain, and I sat in the recorder's office with the old survey books, the leather ones with the marbled covers and the pages gone soft as cloth at the corners, and I traced my grandfather's purchase forward through every conveyance. The clerk there, a patient woman named Ruth, who had pulled books for me for 20 years, brought me coffee in a paper cup and left me alone with the 1898 volume because she knew a surveyor reading a chain of title is not to be hurried. The upland was clearly mine, 6 acres, no question. The water, though, raised an older question, the kind that puts a glint in a surveyor's eye. Lake Verenda was not a natural lake. It had been a river valley until 1931, when a private power company dammed the Verenda for a small hydro station, and the rising water drowned the old river meadows, including a strip of bottomland that my great-grandfather had homesteaded and patented from the federal government in 1898. I had the patent number copied into my field book before noon, and I sat there in that quiet room with the dust turning in the window light and felt the whole shape of it click into place the way a closing traverse clicks shut when your last measurement lands back on your first monument. When the lake came up, nobody bothered to sort out who owned the land now under the water. The power company took an easement to flood it. The fee title, though the actual ownership of that submerged dirt had never been transferred. It still sat on paper in the chain of my own family, unbroken, unsold, undisputed for more than a century. What she did not know was that I had not just discovered this, I had perfected it. 11 weeks before her phone call, I had filed a quiet title action to clear up the old power company easement language, paid the recording fees, and walked out of the county building with a recorded deed confirming that I, Walt Brennan, owned the lakebed of Troutfinger Cove out to the old river Thaweg, which ran well past the end of my 40-foot dock. The water on top was subject to the state's public trust rules for navigation. Sure, anyone could paddle a canoe across it. The bottom, though, the pilings. The right to build a dock down onto that bottom belonged to me by a patent older than the state's own plat of the subdivision. Paula Render thought she was ordering a man to remove a structure from her association's water. She was, though she would not learn it for months, ordering a man to remove his own dock from his own land. I did not tell her. That is the part people find hard to understand. They ask why I did not simply call her back and read her the deed and end it. I will tell you plainly the way I worked it out. At my own kitchen table that April, a man who shows his strongest paper at the first thread teaches the other side to look for a weaker spot. Paula had power behind her, and I did not yet know how much. If I waived the deed early, she would lawyer up, hunt for some defect, maybe try to muddy the recording or pressure the county. I had seen surveys overturned by nothing more than a confident man in a good suit insisting the monument was in the wrong place. No, I would let her build her case in public, on the record, in front of witnesses, until the position she had committed to was so tall and so loud that the simple act of laying one piece of paper on a table would bring the whole thing down at once. So I filed her threat, and I waited, and I watched. The first formal notice came by certified mail 9 days later on a Thursday. It was a violation letter on association letterhead citing me for an unpermitted lakefront structure encroaching on common area and assessing a fine of $250 with the same 30-day removal demand. I signed for it, photographed the envelope and the postmark, and filed it. Incident 1. The fine I did not pay, because you cannot owe a fine to a body that has no authority over you, and paying it would have been the first brick in the wall they wanted to build. An admission that I was a member, subject to their rules. I wrote a short reply instead, 3 sentences, stating that my parcel lay outside their plat, and that I would welcome any review of the recorded boundaries. I sent it certified. I kept the green card when it came back. My daughter Casey was living with me that spring. She was 17, finishing her junior year at the regional high school down in the valley, and she had moved up to the cabin full-time after her mother passed, because the house in town held too much of Diane and not enough air. Casey was the one who noticed the white SUV first. She came in from the gravel one afternoon with her backpack still on and said, "Dad, there's a lady in a pink jacket taking pictures of the dock." I went out. Paula Render was standing on the public boat, ramp 2 coves over, with her phone up, zooming in on my pilings, and when she saw me, she did not lower it. She called across the water, in that bright, carrying voice some people use to make a private moment public. "We're documenting the violation, Mr. Brennan. You'll want to comply before this gets expensive." I did not answer. I raised my coffee mug an inch, the way you tip a hat, and I went back inside and wrote down the date. Casey watched me do it. "You're not even mad," she said. I told her anger was a thing you spent, or a thing you saved, and I was saving mine. That was the spring the staircase began to climb, and I counted every step. In May, the association hired a man to come and inspect the shoreline. He arrived in a golf cart with a clipboard and a laminated badge that said Compliance Officer in letters big enough to read from the dock, and he wore a polo shirt with the association crest stitched over the heart and a pair of white sneakers already gray with my gravel. He walked my upland without asking, taking measurements with a tape, pacing off the distance from my porch to the waterline, and writing numbers on his clipboard with the busy importance of a man who has been told he matters. Until I came down off the porch with my coffee still in my hand and asked him to leave the private property he was standing on. He did not stop writing. "I'm authorized by the association to assess the common area," he said, not looking up. I told him he was 40 feet inside a deeded private parcel, and that I was a licensed surveyor, and that I could show him the monument capping my corner if he wanted to see exactly how far inside my line his sneakers were. That got his eyes off the clipboard. I told him the next step would be a trespass complaint with his name and the cart number on it. He left. Before he went, though, he photographed my truck my gate, my daughter's bicycle leaned against the wall, and the cameras over the door. And I did not like the way he looked at the cabin, the way a man looks at a thing he has been told he is going to get. I filed his visit that night, the take mark still pressed into my lawn where he had pasted off. Incident 4, counting the 2 letters and the boat ramp photographs. I wrote down the cart number and the time, Wednesday, 2:10, and I added a line noting that the association was now willing to spend money to put a costumed man on my land, which told me the dock was worth more to them than $3,000 in fines could ever recover. It was Casey who said, the thing that turned me from defense to something closer to a plan. We were doing dishes, her washing and me drying, because that was our arrangement. And she said, "Why does she even care so much about our dock? It's just a dock." And I stood there, with a plate in my hand, and the dish towel going still, and I realized I had been so busy filing the what that I had not chased the why. A woman does not spend an association's money on a fake compliance officer and certified letters over 40 feet of cedar planking, unless the 40 feet of cedar planking is standing on top of something she wants. Casey saw my face change. "What?" she said. "Nothing yet," I told her. "Maybe something tomorrow." The next morning, I drove the hour and 40 minutes back down to the county and started pulling a different set of records. Not boundaries this time, but business filings, development permits, the Planning Commission agenda going back 2 years. Ruth brought me the binders and raised an eyebrow at the change of subject, and said nothing, which is the highest courtesy a county clerk can pay you. And there it was, hiding in plain sight on the public record, where Paula had not thought a retired surveyor would bother to look. Veranda Crest Partners had filed a preliminary application to build a second phase of the development, a marina and a lakefront commercial pad, 90 boat slips, and a restaurant on the shoreline of Troutfinger Cove. The cove was the deepest, most sheltered water on that whole arm of the lake. The only place a marina could go without a breakwater that would cost more than the slips would ever earn back. I sat in the county parking lot and read the application twice in my truck, with the engine off. And the managing partner of Veranda Crest Partners, listed right there on the Secretary of State's filing in plain black type, was a man named Greg Render, Paula's husband. The dock she wanted torn down was not an eyesore. It was the one privately held structure standing in the footprint of a marina that could not be built unless somebody controlled the bottom of that cove. They had sold homes on a shared waterfront they did not own, and now they needed to make the ownership real before the marina permit went to a vote. And the cheapest way to make it real was to bully an old widower off water they assumed was unclaimed. I want to be careful here, because it would be easy to make Paula into a cartoon, and she was not one. She was a person who had spent 9 years being told she was important by people who wanted to live behind her gate, and somewhere in those 9 years the difference between authority and the appearance of authority had quietly dissolved for her. She believed the cove was functionally part of her jurisdiction because everyone around her acted as if it were. Her husband needed it. The brochures showed it. The homeowners expected it. And so it became true in the only court that mattered to her, the court of her own certainty. That certainty was about to meet a recorded deed, and recorded deeds do not care how many people believe otherwise. By June, the letters had stopped pretending to be polite. A second fine arrived, $500 now, for continued non-compliance, and with it a notice that the association would be placing a lien on my property. You cannot lien a parcel that owes you nothing and lies outside your authority, but a lien filed wrongly is still a cloud on a title. and clouds take lawyers and money to clear. I filed the notice. I also drove down to the sheriff's substation and sat across the desk from a deputy named Hollis, a steady man about my age who had grown up in the valley and knew the lake. I laid out what I had, plainly, no heat in it. The folder squared on the desk between us. Hollis turned the pages slowly, the certified mail cards, the photographed envelopes, the dated log in my surveyor's hand, and then he leaned back and told me the thing that honest officers tell you when you wish they would just fix it. Walt, here's where you stand. If they file a complaint, even a junk complaint, I have to roll on it. I don't get to decide it's junk from my desk. The law doesn't let me weigh it that way. What you can do is build the pattern. Every contact, every letter, every trespass, you write it down, you date it, you keep the proof. You get enough documented incidents, all after they've been told in writing the claim is disputed, and it stops being a neighbor squabble and starts being harassment, and then it's mine to act on. He tapped the folder. Looks like you already keep a good file. I told him keeping files was how I had made my living for 31 years. He almost smiled. Then keep this one, he said. He told me the threshold he needed, a clear pattern of repeated unlawful acts continuing after written notice that the claim was disputed. And he said the magic in it was simple, that a person who keeps escalating after they have been told plainly they are wrong is no longer making a mistake. I asked him how many incidents made a pattern a court would respect. He said it was less about a number than about a clear line crossed after clear warning, but that the more dated and documented contacts I had, the harder it became for anyone to call it a misunderstanding. I drove home the hour and 40 up the mountain with that in my head and a colder kind of patience settling into my chest because I already had the line. I was only waiting for them to cross it. That was the summer Paula made her mistakes faster than I could file them. In July, she stood up at the Planning Commission meeting, the public one, in the county chambers with the flags behind the dais and the clerk's recorder running on the table. And she told the room that the Brennan dock was an illegal encroachment on community waterfront that was holding the entire Trout Finger development hostage. And she said it into a microphone, with a county clerk taking the minutes word for word. She had dressed for it the road flare blazer and the pearls, and she held up a glossy rendering of the marina with its 90 slips and its restaurant deck. And she pointed at the single dark line of my dock, drawn into the corner of the image as if it were a stain somebody had failed to clean. I was in the third row in my work shirt, with my folder on my knee. I did not speak. There is a discipline to sitting still while someone describes a crime they are about to ask the government to help them commit. And I had been practicing that discipline since April. I let her say it on the record, every word. Because a woman who calls a recorded deed an illegal encroachment in front of a government body is a woman handing you the rope, a foot at a time. When the chair asked if any member of the public wished to respond, I kept my hand down. Afterward, a man I did not know, a homeowner, by the look of him leaned over and said, "You going to let her talk about you like that?" And I said, "She's not talking about me. She's talking about a dock she's never measured." He laughed, uncertain. I did not. I went home and saved the meeting audio to 2 drives and wrote the date in the folder, and under it I wrote the words she had used because the day would come when a lawyer would want to know the exact phrasing she had spoken into a public microphone about land she had never checked. The harassment widened, the way water finds the low ground. They came after the few people who used my place. I still did a little survey work for old clients, favors mostly, a boundary check here, a fence line opinion there, and twice that summer a client told me they had gotten a call from the association warning them that my property was under legal dispute and that any business conducted there might be subject to assessment. One of them, a rancher named Pete Lund, who had known me 20 years and whose flatbed had hauled the cedar from my dock, drove the whole way up the mountain just to tell me to my face. He stood in my yard with his hat in his hand and his old diesel ticking as it cooled, and he said, "Walt, I told her where she could put her assessment, but I figured you ought to know she's calling people. Said your land was tied up in court and I'd be a fool to hire you. I told her you'd run my lines for 30 years and never once been wrong, and she hung up on me." He spat in the gravel. "Woman's never met me, and she's calling my house." He offered to sign anything I needed, signed, an affidavit, a statement, whatever a lawyer wanted. I thanked him and walked him through what she had said as near to word for word as he could remember it, and I wrote it down in the folder while he watched, the date and the substance of the call. And I asked him if it ever came to it, would he say that under oath in front of a judge? He put his hat back on. "Walt, I'd say it twice. Incident 9. 2 harassed clients, a fake inspector, a wrongful lien, 3 threatening letters, a public defamation into a county microphone, and a fine total climbing past $3,000. Every one of them dated and proofed and filed. The day and time stamps in my folder were getting close together now, and the dollar figures were climbing, and through all of it, I had not once shown a single soul the deed to the Lakebed. Not Hollis, not Casey, though she knew there was something she had taken to calling it Dad's ace. She did not know what it was, only that I had it, and that I was waiting, and the waiting was its own kind of strength to her. "When are you going to play it?" she asked one night on the dock, our feet over the warm, dark water. I told her you do not play the ace to win a hand. You play it to end the game so it cannot start again. She thought about that and said, Mom would have already yelled at her. I said, your mother yelled at people she loved. She didn't waste it on people she didn't. Casey laughed. And the loon out on the main lake answered, and for a minute it was just the two of us and the water my family had owned, since before the lake existed. Then came September, and the step where Paula crossed the line that made the rest of it inevitable. It was a Saturday, the 12th, early, just past 7. The cove still holding a skin of mist and the ridge not yet gone gold. Casey was still asleep. I was at the end of the dock with my coffee and Diane's empty mug beside it on the rail, when I heard engines on the gravel and the particular flat clank of a trailer ramp coming down. 3 men got out of 2 trucks at my gate, and one of them had bolt cutters, and another had a chainsaw resting on a shoulder, and behind them, on a flatbed, chained down and dew wet, was a small excavator. They had a printed work order on association letterhead, authorizing the removal of an unpermitted structure from Association Common Waterfront. And they had been told, they said, that the owner had been notified, and the 30 days had long passed. The 30 days she first mentioned in April had multiplied into a fiction of due process 5 months long. They cut the chain on my gate, and the sound of it, that single hard snip in the morning quiet, is a sound I will hear the rest of my life. I have it on camera, all of it. 4 cameras saving to 2 drives, because after the fake inspector in May, I had wired the place like a job site, every approach covered, the footage going to a drive in the cabin and a second one off-site. I came down the gravel in my robe with my phone up and recording, and told them they were trespassing on deeded private property and destroying private property, and that the sheriff was already coming, because Casey, awake now and at the window with the phone to her ear, had called him the second she saw the bolt cutters come up to the chain. I did not raise my voice. I told them the parcel was recorded, the dock was on private submerged land, and every man who put a saw to it would be named personally, by name, in what came next, and that I had 4 cameras on them right now, to be sure I spelled the names right. The foreman hesitated and looked at the work order in his hand, as if it had changed weight. The man with the chainsaw did not hesitate. He stepped onto the head of the dock and pulled the cord, and the saw caught and screamed, and blue smoke bit the clean morning air. And that was the exact moment Deputy Hollis's truck came up the drive with its lights going and its tires throwing gravel. Hollis stepped between the men and the dock. He had a complaint in his hand. The associations, because, as he had warned me, he had to roll on it. He also had my folder in his memory, though every incident I had walked him through, and he had the work order in his other hand, now reading it, and his face was doing the arithmetic that mine had done back in April. He told the crew to shut the saw off and stand by their trucks. Then he turned to me and said, "Lo, just between us, Walt, I need the paper, if you've got it. Now's the time. I can hold this for an hour, not a day." And I looked at my daughter in the window, and I looked at the dock where her mother had watched 11 sunrises. And I knew the game was finally at the place where the ace ends it. "Give me 5 minutes," I said. I went to the cabinet, and I took out the folder, the real one, the one I had not opened in front of anyone, and I carried it back down the gravel in my robe, and laid it open on the hood of Hollis's truck in the morning light. Not the violation letters. Not my replies. The recorded deed to the Lakebed of Troutfinger Cove, the quiet title judgment clearing the old easement, the 1898 federal land patent in my great-grandfather's name, and the survey, my own survey, stamped and signed, showing the old river Thalweg running 31 feet past the end of my 40-foot dock. I did not make a speech. I put my finger on the recording stamp and the date, and I said, "This was recorded in January. The patent is from 1898. The dock stands on land I own to the bottom. They're not removing my structure from their water. They're trying to destroy my structure on my land." Hollis read it. He read it twice. He was a careful man, and he wanted to be sure before he moved. And then he straightened up, and the whole weather of the morning changed. He turned to the crew foreman and asked who had signed the work order. The foreman said the order came from the association office from Mrs. Render. Hollis keyed his radio. He asked the men for their identification and the name of their company, and he told them the structure they had been hired to destroy was recorded private property, and that the work order they were holding was authorization to commit criminal mischief and trespass, and that they could either get back in their trucks now. They got back in their trucks. The excavator never came off the flatbed. The chain on my gate lay cut in the gravel, and I photographed it where it lay. And that photograph went in the folder too, the last incident, the one that turned a pattern into a case. What happened after that happened the way these things happen. When the paper is clean and older than the claim, it was slow, and it was bureaucratic, and it was total. Hollis filed his report, and the report referenced the recorded deed, and once the deed was in an official report, it could not be unknown. County Recorder confirmed what I already knew, that the Lakebed of Troutfinger Cove had been an unbroken private title since the 1898 patent, and had been quieted in my name in January. The marina application went before the Planning Commission in October, and the Commission's own counsel stood up and explained, in the dry voice that lawyers use to deliver a verdict disguised as a clarification, that the applicant did not control the submerged land required for the proposed slips and that the application could not proceed without it. Greg Render's 90 slip. Marina had no bottom to stand on. The restaurant pad with it. Bent tent. The entire second phase that had been sold to 240 homeowners as a coming amenity collapsed in a single meeting. Not because I fought it, but because it had always been built on water somebody else owned, and that somebody had simply walked into the county office 2 years early and made it official. The numbers, when they finally lined up beside each other, told the whole story in a language anyone could read. The association had assessed me a total of $3,200 in fines across 6 months. I had paid zero. They had filed one wrongful lien, which the county struck, and they had spent, by the figure that later came out in the homeowner's own meeting, more than $40,000 in legal and contractor costs trying to take a dock that stood on land recorded to my family in 1898. 127 years before Paula Render left a threat on my machine. $0 paid by me, $40,000 and more lost by them. A deed recorded 127 years deep against a claim that was 9 years old and never once checked. Paula did not lose her freedom. I had no interest in that, and the law had no cause for it. What she lost was the only thing she had ever really had, which was the appearance of authority. The contractor she sent filed an account of the work order to protect himself, and that account named her as the person who had authorized cutting a private gate, and the homeowners, when they understood that their dues had funded a $40,000 attempt to seize land their own association did not own, that the marina they had been promised had never been legally possible, and that the whole adventure had been quietly steering toward a development deal her husband stood to profit from, did the thing those bodies do. At the next annual meeting, they voted her out. 9 years of presidency ended in one show of hands, and they brought in counsel to review every action the board had taken on the cove. Greg Render's partnership withdrew the second phase application before it could be formally denied. The kayak icons came off the new brochures. The cove went quiet again. The dock still stands. On the Sunday after the Planning Commission meeting, Casey and I walked out to the end of it with 2 mugs, the way her mother and I used to. And we sat with our feet over water my family has owned since before there was a lake to cover it. And we watched the light come up over the ridge the way Diane had wanted to watch it. For a lot more than 11 mornings, Casey did not say anything for a long while. Then she said, "You never even yelled at her." And I said, "I didn't have to. The paper yelled for me." She leaned her head on my shoulder, 17 and nearly grown and safe, and the loon called from the main lake. And I thought about how my grandfather bought this place off a logging road in 1951, and my great-grandfather patented the ground under the water in 1898 by keeping a folder for me to open on a Saturday morning 60 years later. The land remembers who walked it, the paper remembers who signed it. And if you keep both, you are never as alone in a fight as the other side wants you to feel. Here is what I want you to take from this plainly, because it is the only part of the story that can help you before your own Tuesday morning comes. Walk your boundaries. Not once, regularly, with your own 2 feet, and know where your dirt stops. Pull your deed and read it, the whole chain if you can. And if a lake or a road or a fence sits anywhere near your line, find out who owns the ground under it, because ownership of the surface is not always ownership of the bottom. And the difference can be everything. When a body with a logo and a letterhead tells you that you owe them something, do not assume they are right, and do not get angry. Because anger is loud, and paper is quiet. And quiet wins. Write it down. The date, the time, what was said, who said it. Keep the certified mail cards. Save the recordings to 2 places. File a records request and read the public minutes, because people will say things into a county microphone they would never put in a letter to you. Talk to your neighbors, because the ones being harassed alongside you are the ones who will swear to it. And if you ever find that you are holding the older, cleaner paper, do not wave it at the first threat. Keep it in the folder. Let the other side climb as high as they want to climb, on the record, in public, and then lay it on the hood of the truck in the morning light and let it end the thing in one motion. The deed does not need your voice. It only needs your patience. If you have ever stood on a piece of ground that someone with no claim to it tried to take, I would like to hear how you held your line. So tell me in the comments, because there are more of us than the people with the clipboards would ever guess. If a story told straight and slow like this one is the kind of thing you want more of, subscribe and stay close, and I will keep bringing them up from the county records. One folder at a time. Next time I will tell you about the rancher Two Valleys over whose HOA tried to condemn the only spring on his land for a golf course, not knowing his grandfather had filed the water right in 1916, and what happened the dry summer the golf course came begging to the very well they tried to take. Until then, keep your boundaries walked and your folder full. The paper remembers. Make sure yours does too.